All right, we're at the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you to everybody who, or welcome back to those of you who joined earlier today and have been participating in the other sessions. And welcome to those of you who are just now joining to the Accelerant Research Virtual Insights Conference. Before I introduce our speaker, just a couple of things. We are at the mercy of technology, especially today with the weather as it is. So if something goes awry, come back to this place. We're going to work on getting things restored as soon as possible. But thank you for your patience ahead of time. Let's be respectful. Our speaker will be presenting, and we will have the opportunity to ask questions at the end by submitting them in the Q&A chat room. And now is the time to interact, network, and engage. So we want to hear from you who are out there listening today, hear your stories, and certainly ask your questions. And with that, I'm going to introduce Mike Nallan, Senior Director of Insights and Analytics at Morning Brew. And he is going to talk with us about owning the audience relationship and feedback loop. So Mike, you want to go ahead and get started?
Awesome. Thanks, Leah. I'll share my screen now. Can everybody see this okay? Or Leah, can you just give me a verbal?
Yes.
Awesome. And let me make this full screen. All right. So, hey, everybody. Super excited to be here. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Accelerant Research Team, for inviting me. This is the last presentation of the day. So we're going to have some fun. Thanks for sticking around. My name is Mike Nallan. Like Leah said, I've been working in the consumer research analytics field for over the last decade, always on the media or publisher side. So I've worked at companies like AOL, Condé Nast, that brands like Wired and GQ and Golf Digest and Pitchfork, Highsnobiety. And now currently I have the privilege of leading the insights and analytics team at Morning Brew, where I've been just over 3 years. So I had my 3-year anniversary just a few days ago. So that's pretty new and can't believe it's been 3 years already. But as Leah mentioned, today I am going to be speaking about why investing in owning your audience relationship and feedback loop is critical for business. And so throughout this presentation, I will cover a few things. Firstly, what I'm going to be chatting about is what Morning Brew even is, as I bet many people tuning in today are not familiar with us. Hint, we are not a coffee company. More to come on that. From there, I will talk about the role of my team, Insights and Analytics at Morning Brew, and how we work with the entire organization today. Leading into the main topic, which I'll dive deep into, which is the power of community and research, and again, why owning that feedback loop is really good for business. And finally, I will go through some case studies showcasing the power of that audience relationship and feedback loop and how it has a positive, measurable impact on our business today. And like Leah mentioned, there'll be plenty of time for QA in the end. This presentation should run me around 30 minutes or so we should have plenty of time. So here we go. If you're not a coffee company, what are you? So Morning Brew started back in 2015 as a daily email newsletter by our 2 co-founders, Alex Lieberman and Austin Reef. It was launched essentially as a response to a younger generation of people wanting to consume business news a little bit differently than they had before, or those who came before them. And the options available at the time simply not cutting it. Things like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times at the time, due to this next generation of people, might have felt dry or dense, or maybe boring or lacking the formats that this audience craved. And so the email newsletter was launched back in 2015, and since inception, millions of people have discovered and fell in love with Morning Brew. We now have over 4.2 million subscribers to that daily newsletter, which again was our first product. And if you fast forward to today, we are much more than just a singular newsletter, but now we are a full-fledged media company operating 18 different brands, which you see on the screen here, across all different mediums, podcasts, websites, socially led creator brands, events, both virtual like this one or in real life events. And basically today there's two sides of the business, one of which we refer to as the consumer side of the business. So that's the brands that you see at the bottom of the screen here, which houses our flagship brand, that Morning Brew brand that I mentioned up top, and other brands like Money with Katie, which is a personal finance brand, Good Work with Dan Toomey, which is kind of business satire YouTube content, and Maxonomics, which covers the data behind some of the biggest industries in the world today, which I think the folks on this call would really be interested in, I think. And the other side of the business is what we call brew professional media. And that's those top brands, retail brew, marketing brew. And essentially their mission is to help that audience of decision makers in those industries or job functions be better informed in their careers or their roles at their companies. And today, we are currently the fastest growing business media brand with a footprint of over 200 million across all of our properties and platforms. And the fun part is we're kind of just getting started. Again, launched in 2015. Our 10-year anniversary is actually coming up next year, which is really exciting. And so in a nutshell, across all of those 18 brands, we like to say that we cover the world of business and the business of the world in our uniquely entertaining and witty way. Essentially, we are known for making business and finance news a little bit more approachable, accessible, digestible, and fun to read. All of our content is free. There is no paywall. And we're also known for delivering the exact insights that professionals need to succeed in their careers in that Brew Professional Media division of the business today. And what that's done as a result, I think, is, allow us to become one of the most trusted brands in business media, with almost 90% of our readers stating that they rely on us to make sense of the world around them, whether that's their world in their career or their world in regards to their finances or just business news in general. And 84% saying that our brands are part of their daily ritual. So that flagship newsletter goes out every single day. And not many media companies, I've worked at a lot of different media companies, large and small. Not many media companies can tout this kind of loyalty with an audience that comes back every single day. And so naturally, when you have an audience that is this loyal and cares so much, you get a ton of feedback. So we get plenty of feedback from our audience, mostly good, and of course, sometimes critical. That said, when we do get feedback, it's really nice to see that it is pretty much aligned with how we believe our value proposition, or what we believe our value proposition to be in the market, which is being informative, being entertaining, and exactly what this audience craves. So one audience member, if you see on the bottom left, towards the bottom left of this slide, went as far as to get a tattoo of our logo on their leg. And if that's not dedication, I don't know what is. And many of these, quotes that you see on the screen right now come from our social media. We get comments and things from a feedback standpoint, but that's not the only place, of course, where we're getting feedback. We also have hundreds, if not thousands, of people write back to that daily newsletter every single day and give us feedback, which is always really interesting to read through. And so that's a quick 101 of kind of what Morning Brew is, who we are today, an elevator pitch, if you will. But speaking of feedback, I'm now going to kind of transition into talking through the role of my team today, the Insights and Analytics team at Morning Brew, given the fact that I'm often referenced internally as the feedback guy, being sort of this research insights role that's pretty central to the business. So today, my team consists of 4 individuals, including myself. We work with essentially every single part of the Morning Brew organization. Originally, when I began at Morning Brew, my role was simply to work with our revenue team, but that's quickly evolved over time and expanded quite a bit over my 3 years at the company. So some of the teams we work with the editorial teams and multimedia teams. So these are the folks that are writing the content, producing the content, the video producers, the journalists, the editors. We work with them on sharing insights on how our organic content performs, who our audiences are, to inform future content decisions. We work a ton with brand partnerships on ensuring that our pitches to advertisers are data-driven and rooted in something empirical. We're also responsible for measuring those campaigns. So we do all of our ad efficacy research and measurement on ad campaigns. We work with our events team on things like event concepting and feedback. I'll talk about this in the case study section with a really cool example from our work with that team. And lastly, we work with the growth marketing team, of course, to understand things like churn or audience acquisition health, audience development, and also helping to facilitate the use of our first-party data in marketing or for personalization. And one of the ways that we're able to help all of these different teams is by owning and operating our audience panel for research. But before I talk about that, which again is kind of the meat of this presentation, I wanted to take you on a trip down memory lane and kind of tell you a story. So when I first started at Morning Brew about 3 years ago, again, one of the first things that I did was kind of dive deep into our Slack archive. So Slack, for those who don't know, it's kind of a messaging platform for professionals within a business. And some companies have their archives up and you can kind of go through them. And so I'd spend some nights kind of scrolling through our old Slack channels and understanding or reading the exchanges between teams or even our internal Morning Brew team and our audience. So there was even a Slack channel for brand ambassadors way back then, or even before I joined, where you'd have audience members and people from the business, speaking with one another and asking questions and getting feedback. And after spending a bunch of time in the weeds on these Slack channels and just being, so interested in what each side of that table had to say, I was just fascinated really by the early team's ability to solicit and act on feedback really quickly. And at the time, I'd been hired to help the business gain a better understanding of who our audiences were, how to communicate those audiences. And so it was just so awesome to see that this is a practice or a thing that this business was doing since the beginning. And fast forward to today, we take our audience feedback super seriously. We often act very quickly, which I'll touch on in the case study section as well. And I believe it's a really big part of why we're so successful and the fastest growing business media brand today. And so when I first started working at Morning Brew, one of the cool things I noticed was we were doing a ton of survey research. We were doing so much survey research, but what I found is that across the business, these surveys were kind of sporadic or they lacked cohesion or strategy. For instance, the editorial team would send a survey out and want to understand which topics the audiences wanted more of or craved. The sales team wanted to know what are the key demographics of those audiences in hopes to position them as attractive audiences for advertisers. The product team wanted to know kind of the X's and O's of the product. How is it working? What can we do better in the newsletter or on the websites? The list goes on. And so one of the things that I did when I first got to Morning Brew was kind of help to normalize the way that we ask questions across those different brands and those different surveys or use cases, taking all those seemingly disparate needs or questions into account. Also, so that we can easily compare and contrast across all of these brands now, of which there are 18. I think there was like 4 or 5 when I first started, but it was important to understand the differences between them. So that first survey that I threw out to the Morning Brew audience years ago ended up getting 53,100 responses. And that's something that is just kind of ingrained in my brain always. And I talk about it a lot internally. And it all happened pretty much that same day. And that's more people that can fit inside Yankee Stadium. So immediately my jaw hit the floor and I was like, wow, there's something going on here. This is really interesting. And so again, I'd worked at a lot of media companies before. I've never seen anything like this, not even close. And so I knew inherently that we were going to get a lot of responses to that survey simply due to the scale that we were dealing with at the time, right? I was sending that survey to 4 million subscribers, but never in my wildest dreams did I think we'd get over 50,000 people to answer a survey. And I think the funniest story here is I did, as one does as a research person, so much prep leading up to that survey. Knowing, again, I'm sending an email to 4 million people and my survey is kind of front and center. And so, QAing the survey 10, 15 times the night before, waking up super early to be on call for QA because that newsletter goes out around 5 to 6 in the morning. I even went as far as connecting our survey tool at the time to Google Sheets and sort of writing some formulas and trying to automate some of the data cuts or the analysis up front. And ironically, the Google Sheet broke within an hour of the survey going live because Google Sheets just couldn't handle the traffic. And so not only did we get that many responses, but many of them wanted to continue to engage with the Morning Brew brand in this way. 81% of people that answered that survey said that they wanted to participate in more research with Morning Brew. And it was at this moment when I had one of those aha feelings where I realized kind of quickly that this is a super engaged audience. They love to give us their feedback and can and probably should be used way more across the business than it was that day. And so that's what led us to formally launching what we call the break room. which is our proprietary insights community. And we launched this back in February of 2022. So we're going on, I think it's our third or fourth year operating this community. And so, like I said, the break room is this proprietary insights panel that's made up of over 100,000 audience members across all of those different 18 brands that I talked about at the top of this call. This group is super unique to Morning Brew, with over half being Gen Z or millennials, so those under 44 years old. They're super affluent, so they're way more likely to have a household income of 150K plus than the average consumer. They're pretty senior in their roles, despite being a little bit younger. So almost 60% are managers or above in their roles, which helps us a ton on that professional media side of our business. And the kicker is they're not really reading other publications that are similar to us. And again, that kind of goes back to this origin story around us covering things by design a little bit differently than how these other media companies like The Journal or Reuters or Axios cover them. And if the quality of that audience isn't enough from a demographics perspective or a firmographics perspective, this audience is super leaned in, again, loves to engage with Morning Brew in this way by taking surveys or participating in research activities. And so as a result, we have higher participation rates, response rates, completion rates, and lower stop rates compared to other media companies measured, excuse me. Year of launch, so 2022, we also won what's called the Elite Delta Award, which is an annual recognition of innovators kind of going above and beyond, infusing insights into their organizations all throughout the business, which is just really awesome, and we're really proud of that. So similar to other touch points with this audience, going back to that origin story of making things a little bit more digestible, fun, entertaining. Yes, we want our surveys to be quick. Yes, we want them to be efficient. Yes, we want them to be targeted. But what we also want to do is have a little bit of fun with our audience as well, with questions like this, which we see helps our participation rates and response rates on surveys. And for the record, I am part of the 1/3 of people who would order buffalo wings on the first date. So we ask questions like this often just to have some fun with our audience and sort of keep them engaged along the way. Another note on quality, I think this is super relevant for this crowd. I'm sure many of you tuning in today have dealt with third-party sample that maybe, wasn't the best quality, or you can tell something was off. One of the ways that I typically see this or notice this is in open-ended responses. So you'll ask a question and hopes to get some more qualitative insight on an answer, and you'll get back NA or TK or a bunch of keyboard smash. And for better or for worse, this is an audience, again, that loves to give us their feedback and knows that we're listening to them. And it shows in our actions, which you'll see in the case study section of this again. But I spend a ton of time reading these kinds of feedback from our audience. We've started to use AI a little bit to summarize some of these things and make them themes to just better roll them up or understand them. And we're also sharing these with the appropriate stakeholders throughout the business to, in hopes to drive positive change based on some of this qualitative feedback. So up top, for example, you'll notice we asked a question to our audience in a recent product survey, which was, imagine if you were able to switch places with Neil Fryman, who is the editor of the Morning Brew newsletter. What would you change? And you'll see, we get some usual suspects like, I don't love the ad experience. I feel like all consumers say that about ads. But we also get some really in-depth, thoughtful feedback, which is always helpful and I think helps steer our product in ways that we might have not known before. And we'll also go pretty deep into critical feedback. So if we have a detractor in our audience or someone who says the experience is kind of not up to scratch, whether it's the newsletter, the website, or just something that we've done as a brand, we ask them, why didn't they like it? What can we do better? And again, I think that's really important. And as you can see, this is an audience who sometimes writes multiple paragraphs. So I have a lot of fun reading these across the business. So speaking of the business, I'm now going to walk through some of those case studies that I mentioned on how this insights community is leveraged across the Morning Brew business and all the different teams that we support as an insights and analytics team, which is growing essentially every single year, which is exciting for us. And so first, I wanted to start with how we work with our editorial team. Again, this is the editors, the writers, the journalists, and how we leverage insights from this community to help propel or sharpen that editorial strategy from a topics standpoint. So we have a large amount of Marketing Brew subscribers. Going back to what I was saying about Marketing Brew, Marketing Brew is on that brew professional side of our business, where the point is to, help make marketers better at their jobs or give them the insights they need to succeed in their roles. So we have a lot of Marketing Brew subscribers that are part of the break room. And so a few times a year, what we'll do is we'll ask them what topics they are curious about or want to stay on top of or learn more about. And just for the record, I'm someone from a research standpoint that believes what people say and what people do is often different or contradictory. And so we use this as one of our inputs. So when we get this survey data back, we combine it with other things that we have, like behavioral data, subscription data, firmographics, click data from a topical standpoint, web consumption data from a tagging standpoint to understand what this audience is interested in, to make more informed decisions about what topics our editorial team should focus on or lean into, or even more importantly, sometimes what they should steer away from. And so as a result, we now have a way more robust model or a point system based on this survey research being one of those inputs to determine our core categories editorially. And so far, we've seen a great success with double-digit increases in page views per story within Marketing Brew, which has been super exciting for us as that franchise continues to grow. These next two are going to be about media sales or brand partnerships, which I would say is our biggest stakeholder throughout the business. And this first one is regarding the topical research that we now do in the break room to really help our sales team get in the door with new categories and clients. So as a growing media company, I think sometimes it's hard to start a conversation with a new prospect in a new industry that's maybe non-endemic to us. So if you look at the right side of the screen, you see things like cryptocurrency and investing and credit cards, which, from a Morning Brew standpoint, come a little bit more naturally than some of these other things because we do cover finance a bunch. We don't really dive into alcohol or travel or automotive unless it's from a business standpoint. So what we do is we use this research on these topics with our break room audience to arm our sales team with empirical evidence and key insights that position our audience as an attractive one for these new advertising partners. Or we're showcasing new trends or insights in these categories amongst a really attractive audience. Again, a little bit younger, more affluent, not reading that traditional media. And as a result, one of our, actually our most recent study, which was that bottom automotive research project that we did, secured a bunch of net new client meetings and relationships with some of the major automotive brands in the US. We actually, as of I think 2 days ago, got a new $500,000 RFP in that category as well. So breaking new business is something that we are now supporting quite a bit, which is, again, is a really exciting use case for, I think, research here. The second one within brand partnerships or ad sales is when partners trust us to do research on key audiences on their behalf. So sometimes we'll do deep custom research projects for some of our biggest brand partners, and they come to us to field new research in order to either kind of inform or shape their broader marketing strategy, like Bolt, which is the green logo on the right that you see there, who wanted to hear from our retail decision-making audience what their pain points were with logistics or in-store experiences. And so we have direct access to a senior, high-quality sample of leaned-in audience, exactly who they want to speak to get those questions answered. Or B, fuel branded content or program ideas with the insights gleaned from the research. So Morning Brew produces a ton of content. Sometimes it's branded content. So Fidelity is a great example here where we've run a number of different research projects with Fidelity, but for our co-branded podcast that we do with Fidelity or have done in the past called Fresh Invest, we survey our audience and then showcase the results of those surveys actually within the podcast themselves, because we understand that this is an audience that likes to understand how others like them are thinking. And the cherry on top really is we're supporting now over $7 million in revenue since the launch of the break room in client research, which is only growing. Another great use case on the revenue side of our business. This next one is about our multimedia team. And I think is a fun one because it mixes both kind of an analytics input and a research input, or qual and quant in a way. So on the left, what you'll see is a chart representing the download times of our then new podcast, The Morning Brew Daily Show. And a quick plug, if you haven't heard of it, I would definitely recommend checking it out. It's a 30-minute podcast, essentially briefing you on that day's business news in our tone and voice, educational and informative, entertaining. Anyway, early on, we noticed that the download times for the podcast were happening super early in the morning, around 4, 5, 6 a.m., which was contradictory to when the show was being released. So at the time, the show was being released at 10 a.m. Eastern. So this gave us an inkling, or something to think about, which was maybe people are listening to yesterday's episode when they wake up. We weren't entirely sure. So separately, we got some reader feedback from podcast review sites and break room surveys that this audience wished that the podcast came out a little bit earlier. Most of the things that were being cited were around the commute, right? I wish I had today's news on my drive to work, or I'm on the train and I really wish that it was about today's news, which in retrospect makes a ton of sense. And so our content team acted on this feedback straight away. And I think within 2 weeks' time, we switched our publish time from 10 a.m. Eastern to 7 a.m. Eastern, which pretty much exponentially grew our audience from that point on. You see that in the chart on the right. Nowadays, Neil and Toby, who are our hosts of the show, wake up around 4 a.m. every single day to get this thing out on time, and it's growing exponentially ever since. So it's all not for naught. Morning Brew Daily Show is now the #1 business news show on Spotify and continues to be in the top 10 globally by reach, and it's growing every single week. Go give it a listen again if you haven't heard of it. Lastly, I wanted to share a little bit about how we work with our events team. So over time, we have found that the Marketing Brew audience, I'll use Marketing Brew again here, responds really well to data-driven insights on themselves. So in other words, it seems like marketers are always wanting to know what other marketers are thinking, which again, in retrospect, makes a ton of sense. It's a pretty competitive industry. There's a lot of copycat things that go on in marketing generally. So with our last Marketing Brew Summit, which is an in-person event that we do each year, recently we hosted about 300 marketers in New York City for a day of programming and panels and networking and things like that. Before that event, we decided to survey the attendees that were parts of the break room and understand kind of how they're feeling about the things that we're covering, what trends we should be looking into, and then showcase those findings in the opening remarks of the event. So not just telling this audience that we're listening to them and taking their opinion into account, but showing them. And so we've got great feedback on that event so far. 91% said that they would attend another Marketing Brew event. And then we have some write-in feedback that just shows how much the audience loved this intro to the day. And selfishly, I also love the stat that Kelsey, the editor of Marketing Brew, who's featured in that image on the right side there, was presenting, which shows that 79% of marketers consider audience insights and data to be very or extremely important. Do with that what you will. And then lastly, so that's it for case studies. I thought it would be fun to kind of leave you all with some takeaways and tips for insights professionals from spending a bunch of time doing this. I think the first that I would call out is keep your head on a swivel. So one of the early lessons that I learned was insight can come from pretty much anywhere. And if you open up your mind to it, you'll find that you're more welcoming to things, or you notice things that are relevant to your work or what you're studying all throughout everyday life. These can be things that you do at work, like qual methods, quant methods. They could be conversations that you have with friends on a bar stool. They could be something you read or listen to, like the Morning Brew Daily Show podcast, or they could be something that you come across on your social feed. And for me, it's important to notice those things and kind of collate them into a deeper understanding of what it is that you're looking at or studying. The second is treat your audience as humans. Remember, those that you're doing research on are people too. I think at times research gets a bad rap as feeling kind of robotic and stuffy. So within reason, try to have some fun. Plus, when we do have some fun, we tend to see higher participation rates and completion rates on research activities, which is always great to see. And the last is expand your surface area. This is something that Priyanka actually said in an earlier session today, and something that I say to anybody joining my team, whether it's at Morning Brew or before this. I believe one of the toughest things for insights professionals today is what I refer to as insights distribution and shelf life of insights. So when you notice something interesting or you do a big project, try to get in front of the most amount of people possible, and all the while kind of tailoring your message to those folks when you go to showcase that research to them. And I think what is interesting to one team is often interesting to another, but just from a slightly different vantage point or angle. And that is all I had. I threw a QR code on here in case you wanted to subscribe to that daily newsletter that started it all. But I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Mike. And
Yeah.
we do have one question so far. Does Morning Brew compensate readers who participate in the break room?
Yes. So we do a lot of thinking about incentives, and my spiel on incentives is we want to try to make the value exchange as close to 50-50 as possible with our readers and this community of people who's opted in. And so we compensate them in a few ways. Sometimes it's early access to things. Sometimes it's behind the scenes access to things. Sometimes it's tickets to events or early invites to events. Sometimes it's raffles. Sometimes it's merch packages. To answer your question a little bit more directly, not everybody is, paid per se to join the panel, but they are incentivized in other ways from the brand.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm sold. Picking up what you're throwing down. What recommendations do you have then for how to get started?
How to get started. I think when you say how to get started, do you mean with kind of
With an
building
insight community?
with an insight community? I think it can at first feel like a pretty scary thing. Oh, there's a bunch of tech involved, or oh, there's so much to do. There's so many things to consider, which of course there is. But I think if you don't have the investment or you don't have the resources, it's actually pretty simple, which is you get a list of your customers or your audience members, and you reach out to them, even if it's just one-on-one, and have some conversations. Ask them if it's okay to add them to, a list that you'll collate or curate rather for research purposes, and allow them to opt in. And even if you're building like a mini database in, a protected Google Sheet, I think that's an interesting place to start, because then you start to profile your community of readers or customers or whatever it is, but you can keep going back to them and see how they've maybe answered questions differently. And I'd say on that note, it's important to try to build in some level of what I would refer to as like progressive profiling. Allow them to update their information. Allow, anytime they maybe answer a new question, that question gets pulled into their profile, just so that you have a good, like more holistic understanding of who they are, but also what they're doing maybe, or their opinions on things. But I would say you can start with a Google Sheet and just talking to customers or readers.
Okay. So you talked about you have an engaged audience, which you're very lucky to have. Um, and you talked about a little bit about, putting out fun questions and things like that in order to keep people engaged. What else are you doing to keep that response rate high and people engaged?
I think the activity targeting is a big part of it. So there's two parts, I think. One is the progressive profiling piece, and the other is the targeted research piece. On the progressive profiling piece, as new responses to different activities come in, we learn that piece of data about that specific community member, which allows us to be super tailored in our questionnaires or the logic that we use in surveys or how we target surveys. So rarely, I would say, are we just sending a survey out to the entire community. We either A, are super specific about the types of people that we want in that sample, or B, using logic to, or really skipping questions that we've already asked in the past. So we're not repeating questions based on that progressive profiling. So let's say I think there are 25 what we refer to as profiling variables on this audience: gender identification, age, seniority at work, So we get to skip those profiling questions anytime we're doing a new research activity, which I think helps with the brevity of those studies and helps us kind of get to the point. But we can still use that profiling data in analysis too, which is also critical and really helpful.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And I think that's all of the questions that we have. So as a reminder, the video sessions today were recorded and will be available in the coming days so that you can rewatch or share if you've got a friend or colleague who might be interested. And wanted to thank you all for joining today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.